Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to California Advancing PREA office hours with a focus on an assessment and evaluation from the point of view of incarcerated survivors. This discussion will offer rape crisis centers the opportunity to hear from other agencies about the methods they're currently using to receive feedback on the victim services they're providing to incarcerated survivors. And we'll have some time to review some examples of evaluations and assessments to take back to our teams to sort of adapt and create and enhance for our own services. So welcome everyone that's joining. I see Allison, Eliza, Esmeralda, Allison, welcome. I see some folks saying you won't be on camera. That's totally fine. We will have a breakout session, just a heads up, just to give you a warning. We'll be in groups with folks. It looks like we're probably going to have a smaller session today. So welcome everybody. Please, like I said, keep introducing yourselves and we will also introduce ourselves. So I will go to the next slide and introduce myself. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Marcela Rojas Salas. I'm one of the project coordinators here, project managers, went back 2 years here at Valor US. I use she, her pronouns and have been on the California Advancing PREA project for a little bit over 2 years now. So I'll pass it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves as well.
Hi folks, my name is Jenica Steinor. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am one of the newest members of the Valor team as a project coordinator for the Advancing PREA project. I have been in direct service prior to this, working at a dual agency for DV and SA survivors. Yeah, that's me.
Hello, good morning, everyone, or afternoon. My name is Shelby Phillips, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm the program and communications coordinator here at Valor. I've been with the organization now for about 4 years, so some of you may know me already, but if not, I'm happy to be here with you all today. I'm here to provide some extra tech support, so if you guys have any issues with breakout rooms or any other tech issues, feel free to send me a private message.
Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Yamila. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a program officer with Just Attention International. And I do a couple of things in that position, including operating our hotline and answering correspondence. And I'm excited to be here with y'all.
Thanks so much, everyone, for introducing yourselves. I'll hand it over to Jenica to do our how to use Zoom slide here.
Okay, so we've all been on Zoom for quite a long time, but we like to review these things just in case. So please remember to keep your mics muted unless you're speaking or sharing, or until we're in the breakout rooms. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or since we're a smaller group, you feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask a question. We know that a lot of folks are on hotline calls or are multitasking, so if you need to go off camera, feel free to do so, and come in and out and take in and out of the webinar. And then we are recording this session, so this recording and the slides will be posted on the website. I think we get those up on the website tomorrow or by Monday. So if you want to review these and share this with anybody, you can do that.
Thank you, Jenica. So always want to introduce ourselves. We are Valor US, formerly the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and we're committed to preventing and ending sexual violence by advancing equity and eradicating oppression. We provide leadership, vision, and resources to rape crisis centers, individuals, and other entities committed to ending sexual violence. And ultimately, we envision a world free from violence where the dignity of every person is valued and respected.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, I'm here on behalf of Just Attention International. We're a health and human rights organization that seeks to end sexual abuse in all forms of detention. And our core goals are really just to work with corrections officers, rape crisis centers, and policymakers just to make detention facilities safer. We also want to change public attitudes about sexual abuse behind bars, and we want to ensure that survivors get the help that they need. It's our fundamental belief that when the government takes away someone's freedom, it takes on the absolute responsibility to protect that person's safety. So no matter what crime someone has committed, JDI's core principle is that rape is not part of the penalty.
And this webinar is brought to you by the California Office of Emergency Services, also known as CalOES. That's where our funding comes from for the California Advancing PREA project that allows both Valor and JDI to partner in offering support and guidance to California rape crisis centers and correctional facilities on how to build strong relationships with each other, including county jails, juvenile facilities. And so we provide guidance on how to create sustainable agreements for the provision of victim services to survivors. Although much progress has been made over the last 7 years of the project, we also understand that there still continues to be gaps and challenges in the services available behind to survivors behind bars. So we're always here for support. If folks would like some one-on-one support, we're here to provide that sort of TA. And we will continue on with talking about some of the objectives for today. So for today's session, we're really going to have an understanding of the importance of receiving feedback from incarcerated survivors. I know that sometimes we do provide client surveys to folks in the community, but it may be a little bit more challenging to get feedback from folks that are incarcerated. So we want to be able to have a conversation about why it's so important to do that and think about some methods to assess service provision from RCCs to incarcerated survivors. And then last but not least, provide examples of assessment tools to use with incarcerated survivors. So I want to just mention too that this is not the end of our conversation about evaluation and assessment. We would love to work with you all one-on-one to create surveys that work well for the services that you're providing. Not every program is the same, and so we want to make sure that you all are adapting it to not just detention, but to your program as well. So we were, like I mentioned earlier in the beginning of the webinar, we're going to start with breakout sessions, just kind of get a sense of where folks are at with assessment. So I'll pass it over to Yamila to get us started.
Yeah, definitely. We want y'all to warm up with sort of a conversation. So we just have a few questions here to guide the discussions that you'll have in your breakout groups. You'll have about 15 minutes to share amongst yourself, and then we'll come back together and have a quick share out. I'm going to drop these questions in the chat too, just so that y'all have them. Oh, Michelle beat me to it. Just kidding. It's there twice, so y'all can really discuss these points. And then again, we'll come back together and have a larger group share out.
And Shelby, if you could get us into 3 different breakout sessions and have Jenica, Yamila, and I in different sessions, that would be great. Thanks, Shelby.
Hi, folks.
Hello.
How y'all doing?
Okay.
Thursday, we're getting close to, the weekend, if that means something for us. Depends on, the schedules are kind of wild. Let's see. Okay, so some of the questions we have, our first question is, why do you think feedback is important for growth?
I could start the conversation. As far as myself, I'm actually the supervisor for the sexual assault programs. And one of my programs is KA, which is basically, providing services inside facilities. So for me, it's more of a grant purpose as well, because sometimes we do have to identify like narratives, like clients telling us, their story and trying to get funding that way. So I think feedback as well has to go with, kind of goes along those lines, where we need to know what's running right, what's not. And it really does help me assist my coordinator and my advocate a little bit better, because then, because I'd given, I actually did offenders education at one point in my career. So it's a little different because obviously offenders and, victims that are incarcerated. So I have to kind of put on a little bit of multi hats where I need to get, statistically numbers, how many people we serve, what we're serving them in, but then trying to make sure that if something is not being done correctly, we try to fix that. And I think that's where the feedback really assists us, because how are we gonna know what to fix if, the person that's going through it doesn't tell us? So
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
why. That's my introduction to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes perfect sense. Thank you so much. And Marcella, I'm in Sacramento. I was at WEAV for many years, so I love stand-up class there, and I've always loved y'all. And then Eliza, if I'm saying that right, had let me know that they're working on a couple of things, so they may chime in, but they may not. So
I suppose I can chime in. I think feedback is always important. It's always nice to know if what we're doing and how we're doing it is helpful for the survivors that we're providing services to. I think also it's quite difficult to communicate with AICs in general. So really spending time and focusing energy on getting feedback is not really always a priority necessarily when you're providing services to that population. So I'm kind of looking forward to hearing other people's experience with this, because truthfully, it's not something that we currently put a whole lot of focus on. And I think that there could be a lot of growth in that for our agency. I should have said, I'm up in Oregon, Salem. Salem is the capital of Oregon. We have surprisingly 5 facilities within our county that we provide services to. So it's like a uniquely concentrated area. But yeah, just another opportunity for growth, I think, in this.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for thank you both for those answers. And I think, I'm a data nerd, I'm a feedback nerd. I love hearing people's perspectives, and the information that we gather during surveys or during questionnaires can really help inform and improve our programs overall, and really give us a sense of is this helpful and is this not. I think a lot of times, especially with incarcerated folks, we can go into this program thinking, oh, this is exactly what folks need, and then you get feedback that that's absolutely not what someone needs, and that feedback is invaluable. So thank you both for that. Eliza, I'm going to pause for a second to let you chime in if you want to, but I'm going to assume you're not going to. Okay. So this next question here is, how do you currently receive feedback from survivors? And so this question is a little like, I don't know, it's phrased kind of funky for me. So like, we're asking kind of more like, how do you get information currently from clients, or how do you, if it's informally, like, oh my God, thank you so much for this class, or, I need to file a complaint, like, or if you do have surveys or do have, evaluations that are in place, how do you gather that information?
I can go again just because I feel like we're going back and forth. So basically for me, I do have sometimes where clients actually come in and meet with my coordinators for KA or an advocate. So I do get the chance to speak to them sometimes, and they offer me feedback like, "Hey, thank you so much, I enjoyed blah, blah, blah." Or I do read notes. So sometimes I think with inputting notes, we don't realize the feedback that we're getting. So I tend to read the notes on the client interactions. So I get it that way. And then I have had, I also assist sometimes on our crisis line. So I've had calls from our go inside the facility. So sometimes in speaking with them, they also like let us know certain details, and it's kind of like, okay, I understand now. So it's different avenues, but they are really informal. But we do have a formal like document that my coordinator and advocate do provide to the clients, but it's totally up to them if they want to, provide it. And to be honest, I've been in my position a little under a year. So I haven't really actually seen that document too much. I feel as though sometimes it's just more word of mouth, if anything. Most people tend not to fill it out and like put their name and those details because I guess it's not really that important to them. I don't know.
Sure.
Like that.
I just wanted to add that I currently don't have a method to receive written feedback, but I do really like that idea. Otherwise, it's just phone calls. And, you know, if it's about me specifically, my clients might not feel comfortable telling me verbally over the phone. So I'll probably be discussing this with my manager when she comes back next week.
Thanks. Thank you, Eliza. Chris, I don't know if you wanted to chime in. It sounds like we have like a minute or two left.
We don't currently have a formal way of doing it, kind of like I was saying earlier. But yeah, no, it's really just based on conversation and.
Back anyways. Okay.
I'm so sorry.
It was fast.
That was very fast.
Went by so fast.
I'm like, should we do it again?
I moved my mouse and it sent me out of our breakout room. So
I think we can continue the conversation here because I think we were all like, we just got started talking. So Priscilla, I met Priscilla and Sana over at Waymakers in Orange County. Priscilla and Sana had some good ideas in terms of what kind of feedback would they want to get from their clients. And this is something I hadn't thought of in terms of getting feedback at the beginning when you first start meeting with folks. And Priscilla, I kind of want to hand it over to you and see if you want to share a little bit about what your ideas were for the kind of feedback you're looking for.
She might be on a client call.
I think she might be on a call. Okay. Yeah. That's fine. I can talk about it. And so feedback she was looking for was, are you seeing the outreach materials inside the county jails? Do you know about all the different reporting options? Did you know about it before you met with an advocate here at Waymakers? You know, she mentioned that a lot of folks don't know that their family members or their friends can report, make a PREA report if they are sexually assaulted behind bars. So that would be really helpful in terms of gauging how they're receiving information, if they're receiving information, and then sharing that data with your correctional partners in terms of, hey, you know, we're meeting with our clients. They heard about these services or they heard about reporting options through us, but they weren't hearing about it prior to meeting with us. What can we do to get the word out a little bit more? And I love that idea because I think it puts the onus back on corrections to be able to hold some responsibility in terms of spreading that word. And it's not like we're saying, you know, you need to do this. It's really coming from the folks that are in their custody. So really appreciated that idea. Thank you, Priscilla. I know you're on a hotline call, so hopefully I spoke to that clearly. Yeah, Yamila and Jenica, what did your groups talk about? And we can continue the conversation too if you got cut off.
Sorry, it took me a second. Yeah, so I was in a group here with Chris and Eliza and Maricela, and I really enjoyed our conversation, so thank you. We didn't get through all the questions because it was, we you know, had a lot of chats. But one of the things that came up in both of the questions is, you know, we get feedback in a variety of ways, whether that's through conversation with clients, through hotline calls that are like after the fact, and we're hearing the feedback about their experience, or, you know, that sometimes we will, you know, get that information through surveys if we have a formal written survey, but also there's, you know, even through the notes that we have from our advocates, that we can really get that information that way as well. But there is a strong kind of need or want across all three agencies to maybe improve that system of receiving feedback, or having formal surveys or something to really formally gather that information.
Yeah, I think I also saw that reflected in my group. And I don't know, Esmeralda, if you felt comfortable sharing, but we spent a good chunk of the time because it was my bad for cutting the conversation short. But we talked about some of the barriers to evaluation. And so Esmeralda, I don't know if you're there, and you wanted to share anything, or I can do it too, whatever is best.
I forgot what I said. I think I was talking about having issues in getting our monolingual Spanish community to feel comfortable with surveys. And I think just that weariness or maybe them not feeling safe providing information and, you know, like kind of expressing themselves and then kind of feeling like, well, what are you going to do with this? And because we do have a lot of turnaround, we see clients, you know, back, I think there's maybe that fear if like, if I say something, I might not, you know, be heard again or taken back. So I think that's the piece that we're trying to see, how do we work better with our community.
Go ahead, Marcela.
No, I was just gonna say thank you, Esmeralda. I know you had to probably grab your kiddo, and I was gonna ask a follow-up question in terms of, have you thought about maybe conducting the surveys over the phone or like while you're in session, so that it's more like a conversation rather than like, you know, because surveys I think can be a little bit dry, especially if you're working with the community that's like, why are you collecting data about me? You know, like, where are you gonna put this? Instead, it's more humanizing to kind of have a conversation about, you know, we've been meeting for a few weeks now. How are the services going? Are you getting what you were hoping for, you know, or what you were expecting when you reached out to us? And I think sometimes those open-ended questions can be helpful. And even if you have like a multiple choice question, just like reading it out loud can be helpful too. It just kind of, like I said, it humanizes the process. So it's not like you're just collecting data from someone, but you're having a more informal conversation. And I think to also affirm other folks talking about, we get feedback from folks pretty directly in our letters too. And I think with assessment and evaluation, it's really about sort of systematizing and like streamlining your feedback so that you're getting feedback, not just from the folks that feel comfortable vocalizing feedback, but from the folks that wouldn't, you know, initially provide that feedback or think to give you that feedback. So appreciate y'all for having that very quick and short conversation. We're going to go back to our presentation and then we'll have some more time at the end for any questions that y'all might have. But if you have any questions now, feel free to drop them in the chat and we will make sure to get to them. And Shelby, if you can make me host again or co-host so I can share my screen, that would be awesome. Thank you. So just a bit about the basics of evaluations. I think most of the time in our field, we call this program evaluation, client surveys, feedback surveys, and sometimes they're attached to a larger grant and there are expectations from our funders to ask certain questions. But there are some questions that we may want to add or ask to be able to really incorporate our own philosophy of our program, to get some actionable findings that will enhance the program's mission, and in your case, providing comprehensive victim services to incarcerated survivors. So a couple different purposes for providing or sending out client surveys would be to have a better understanding of the impact of your services in education. When I was speaking with folks at Waymakers, they talked about, we want to know if the resources we're sending you and providing you are actually conducive to the needs that you have. And maybe to better understand how correctional partners are impacting your clients. Again, Waymakers mentioned having a sense of whether folks are seeing those outreach materials or know about the reporting options, to build on the efforts that are effective, right? So if we're doing something right, we want to make sure we continue to do that. And then to prevent any sort of usage of resources and capacity on efforts that aren't as effective. Maybe we are providing referrals to an organization and they're not hearing back from that organization. Or maybe there's a department that we've sent them to within the jail that is not helping them. I think usually folks will tell us directly in a letter, but if they're not, it would be really helpful to ask directly, right? And then to provide an opportunity to just overall empower survivors to voice their feedback. I think that incarcerated folks do a really good job of giving us feedback, but not everyone's going to have that same experience. And so we want to, again, like I said, streamline that opportunity to provide that feedback. And then last but not least, I kind of mentioned this earlier, is to provide agencies with hard evidence of the need for your services to present to funders. I know that we're always looking to get more funding for the services that we're providing. And so oftentimes it's about really proving that the need is still there. And I think with incarcerated survivors, this need is always going to be necessary. And learning how to express why that need is important is going to be important for us, especially when it comes directly from the mouths of the folks that are receiving those services. And I'm sure there are other purposes on here. If you can think of any, feel free to drop them in the chat or let me know by raising your hand. But I also want to just mention something that's not on this slide, is to be mindful of when we're administering the evaluations. Timing in terms of the questions that you're asking are going to be really important, especially if your evaluation involves interviewing survivors who are using or who have used your services. The time at which you gather the information could distort your findings. So if you want to evaluate whether survivors find your support group helpful, for example, would you ask them after their first meeting, their third, after 2 months? I know that folks that are working in county jails, you often only see one person one time during your support groups. So you may just have to get that feedback every single time you provide that support group. But if you're doing support groups in a CDCR facility, you may do a client survey at the very first one and then at the very end to kind of see what has changed. If you're trying a new activity and you haven't used it before, you may want to get feedback on that particular activity and just ask vocally or ask 1 or 2 questions, and we'll show JDI's version of an evaluation or client feedback form for support groups in a little bit here. That's pretty short and very straight to the point. So really thinking through, like I mentioned, what questions are you asking at what point? You might ask the questions that we mentioned earlier on that Waymakers mentioned in terms of, are you seeing those outreach materials out there? How did you hear about our services? And then asking some more questions later down the line about the services and referrals you're providing. So we're going to get a little bit more into some specificity around how to collect surveys in a more anonymous versus confidential way. So I'll pass it over to Jenica for this one.
Awesome. Thank you, Marcella. So when we think about evaluations and assessments, the words anonymous and confidential have different definitions. We often use them really interchangeably, but the distinction between the 2 words is really important when we're considering evaluations and surveys and whatnot. So when we think about an anonymous survey or an anonymous evaluation, that means that we don't know who the responses came from. For example, questionnaires that are left in like a locked box is anonymous. So like, you know, the suggestion box in an office setting, right, is an example. That's not always an option for incarcerated survivors unless, you know, you have an agreement with the PREA coordinator and they keep it in a safe area, and there's, you know, different hoops you can jump through that. But even then, you'd have to think about who's around when they're submitting that feedback, who's around when they're just dropping that feedback survey into the box. It can, you know, alert folks that might impact our client safety. And then when we talk about confidential evaluations or confidentiality, you do know, or you can find out really easily who the responses came from, but you as an agency are committed to keeping the information to yourself and not sharing it. So this could mean like someone who participates in a focus group, they're not anonymous. You know that Jane participated in the focus group, but they can expect that their responses are kept confidential. Confidentiality and anonymity are not always guaranteed behind bars. As we know, incarcerated survivors are regularly monitored, and they're monitored closely. So that's always something to keep at the forefront of your mind when you're considering, you know, confidentiality and considering, you know, anonymity. Next slide, thank you. The next couple slides, we're going to go over the different methods to distribute and collect these kind of evaluations or surveys, either through letter or support group or over the phone. We always want to keep in mind that our evaluation tools shouldn't interfere with our interventions or be an intrusive element when we're establishing safety and trust with survivors. Rather, the evaluation tool should enhance the recovery and integration process. So, one of the things I always think about when we're developing a surveyor evaluation is like, why do we need this information? Why do I want this information? You might be curious about it overall, but what purpose is this going to serve versus it being an intrusive element? Keep in mind, also no matter what method you choose and what, if you find examples online or we take a look at examples here, you'll always need to adapt things and adapt examples to be inclusive to survivors in detention. And then we'll also need to be mindful of when we administer those evaluations. Marcella touched on it a little bit earlier. When you're administering those surveys, in a support group, it doesn't necessarily make sense to do it at the first session, or you might want to do it at the fourth session. Really keep in mind of when you administer those evaluations. So the first method we're going to go over is written questionnaires. And so some of the advantages, so this would be, a survey you hand out in a group, or maybe a survey that you mail someone via letter. First, I really just want to plug this cool tool that Microsoft has. You can, and I think Michelle, if you could drop that in the chat when you have a chance, in order to help see the readability and the reader level through Microsoft Word. You can use your content and add it to and use this tool with Microsoft, and it'll tell you what reading level it's at, which is always super helpful. Some of the other advantages to written questionnaires are, you can send that via letter, and clients can really take their time and fill it out at their own speed and take their time and really make sure they're answering it in the way that they'd like to. It's more likely to be confidential because the survivor has a chance to, do what they want with it or tuck it away and do the survey later on. They have more control over that privacy. Some of the disadvantages is that questions, are more likely to be misunderstood because, you might not be there to clarify the question that's being asked, or not there to kind of provide additional information if someone's having trouble with the question. It also can feel less personal and a little bit more invasive potentially. And then if you're mailing the questionnaire, honestly, we've all thrown away a Taco Bell receipt, right? Where you have to do the survey at the end. Someone could just toss it. When you're doing written surveys, we run the risk of a low response rate. Can we go to the next? Yeah, next slide. The second method we're going to talk about a little bit is telephone interviews. So that's, when you're either on the hotline or you have set up a time with your client to go over a survey. It can feel way more personal. It humanizes the conversation, like Marcella was saying earlier. You're able to provide info or clarify information in real time if someone's misunderstanding the question, or if the answer, you need a little bit more information of the answer. It often results in more detailed information than written correspondence. And then, honestly, sometimes it can have the potential to help a client heal by sharing their feedback. We all know the power of feeling heard, right? And so feeling heard in a survey and being able to give
direct feedback can really prioritize someone's impact and let them know we're taking this really seriously. We want to hear your information. We want to hear your feedback, especially for incarcerated folks. It's really important for folks to be able to give that feedback for our services. And some of the challenges that we have with, telephone interviews is we might have, we have a limited time to provide that feedback over the phone or get that feedback. Clients might not feel comfortable. I think Eliza had mentioned this. Clients might not feel comfortable providing direct feedback to you as a service provider. So let's say they were in your, they were in your support group and they liked it overall, but week 5 and 6 were really boring. That's really hard to tell someone to their face, right? And so sometimes that can be really hard. Depending on if the client's in a safe location or not, it might be dangerous or might not be very safe for them. Again, we don't know who might be around or who might be listening or watching our client as they're, on the phone taking our survey. And because of this, we always want to have this reminder, we never recommend like setting up a call with a client without them knowing ahead of time or without them giving you really explicit information, especially considering, the topics that we might talk about. Sexual assault and domestic violence could trigger someone or pull up different emotions, and we never want to surprise someone with that. And then, telephone interviews are sometimes the method of choice when staff want to interview someone after the services they've received or after a client has stopped coming to support groups, left counseling, ended their involvement with advocacy. You might still want to like talk with them about their experiences. So it's something that you could do post services as well. So, things to keep in mind when we're putting together our evaluations or putting together our surveys is to review your language and be inclusive and accessible to survivors behind bars. You really want to be intentional and think about a plan on how and when to incorporate the client survey, whether it's via letter, hotline call, or in person. And then again, if you're administering the survey over the phone, being really mindful of time constraints.
Thanks, Jenica. So we're going to move into talking about examples of feedback surveys. Some of these surveys will be for one-on-one direct services. Others will be for group settings like support groups. And when you're looking through these examples, think about the goals you have for your program. And keeping that in mind will help you be like, okay, are these questions that are being asked on these surveys actually relevant to my program? What do you really hope to accomplish when working with incarcerated survivors? You want to be asking yourself that. Some of these surveys can be actually only one of these surveys will be ready to go and to be shared with incarcerated folks. But I did want to provide some examples of questions that we may not exactly want to be using with our clients, and kind of just have an opportunity for folks to look at what's on the slide right now, read through it, and think through, would my incarcerated clients want to respond to this? Would they feel safe responding to this? Is this relevant to them? And this in particular is a client survey with an empowerment and satisfaction approach. It was created by PCAR, the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape. It isn't, again, a survey that's specifically created for incarcerated survivors. So we're using this as an example of what we could include, what needs to be adapted, and what needs to be eliminated. So I'll read through a few of them at the same time that you all are reading it. And we'll kind of talk about, okay, again, what can we keep, what can we eliminate, and what can we adapt? So here's the first question. Staff respected my background and have some examples of gender, race, culture, ethnicity, etc. And I think this is an important question to keep here, right? Because I think in particular, when we're working with incarcerated folks, folks are thinking, can I trust these folks? Are they thinking from a deficit perspective about where my circumstances are right now? And so as much as we work to undo biases when we're providing services, our clients may feel differently. And so we want to give them that opportunity to tell us whether or not they felt respected in an array of different ways. Number two, services were available at times that were good for me. This may not be a statement you include in your client survey if you aren't currently providing in-person services. If you're only doing support via letter or hotline, this is probably a question you want to eliminate, right? Letter writing and correspondence isn't something that you can do at a specific time, right? There are certain circumstances that kind of get in the way of getting a letter to someone at a specific time, right? Let's see, another question. I was asked to participate in deciding what services I would receive. Another question that I think that would be still important to include in a client survey, because it really measures to what extent your services and options that you provided were led by the survivor's needs and their goals. And on the right-hand side, there are some questions here that in my mind would be pretty triggering for someone to read, especially if they're incarcerated, especially if they don't have access to their community of support. And so I'll read one of the questions here. To what extent have you lost enjoyment for things, felt sad or depressed, kept your distance from people, or found it difficult to experience feelings? And I want to hear if you have any thoughts about this question in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself. I want to hear from folks. How would you, if you were to include this in here, how would you conduct the survey? Would you do it over the phone? Would you have someone, would you send this to somebody in a letter? Would you not include this question at all? What are your thoughts on the question?
Hello, everybody. I first I want to apologize that I got disconnected in the breakout room. I felt so bad.
No need to apologize. Thanks.
I was left talking. I'm like, oh my gosh. So now I'm on my laptop. Definitely, I would probably want to basically present this survey to the incarcerated survivor through the phone or via GTL, as opposed to mailing it in. That's just basically like how I would conduct the survey. As far as question 10, definitely triggering for sure. But yeah, I would basically want to be more personable and over the phone or via GTL.
Yeah, I agree. I think this might not even be a survey question. It may just be a service provision question, right? Like this may be a question you ask over a hotline call to see what kind of services you can provide. So I think really being able to provide that emotional support, those coping mechanisms right after you ask this question. Yep, Sana, I see you. I think I would want to try and bring these questions out in conversation on the phone with a survivor. Absolutely. I don't think we want to be sending this to somebody in a letter. It could be something that is really triggering for them and they're left sitting there wondering, well, now what do I do now that I'm reminded of the feelings that I have? So being able to be there as a support system over the phone, yes, agree, absolutely.
I also think down over the phone would probably be the best method. With question 12, to what extent have you lost enjoyment for things?
Yeah,
I think that's a complicated question. I would not ask the question like that at all because they are incarcerated. I mean, it's right. I mean, it's just, I find it like a little bit inappropriate because they've already lost so much. So I would try to rephrase the question, like things that you can do, you know, that you have been able to enjoy, you know, smaller things like going to the library, having your books, like, you know, the extent that you can enjoy things, like has things shifted? Have they changed? I would definitely reword the question.
Yeah, I really love what you said there, Priscilla. It's like the same questions we ask to folks in the community are not going to be the same questions we ask to folks that are incarcerated. Some of these questions they may be responding to from the perspective of a survivor and someone who's incarcerated. They may be unhappy and depressed because they were sexually assaulted and also because they're incarcerated, because they have less access to their community, because they are losing autonomy, so many different reasons. And so with these particular questions, I think we have to be specific about what we're asking and also shift the language to, I loved what you said in terms of, you know, to what extent have you experienced joy? How, you know, what has brought you joy? So flipping the script on some of these questions. Jenica knows I love a working meeting, so I appreciate y'all for humoring me and answering these questions on the fly. Any other thoughts on the questions on here? No thoughts? Okay, love these ideas. Appreciate y'all for humoring me with this question. And if anyone is wondering, like, okay, how do we create an actual evaluation that's specific to folks in detention? Let's set up a call. Let's talk about that. And we will do our best to support you with that. So here is another example we have, but this is specific to support groups. If folks have not heard of A Window Between Worlds, I highly recommend doing more research on their organization. They are an organization that supports many direct service organizations across the country to incorporate more creative expression into their work with trauma survivors. And I think in particular, when we're working with incarcerated folks, their tools are really helpful because the expectation is not for folks to really process their trauma, especially if they're not ready, nor do they want to, but to be able to use creative expression to think about what they've gone through, to cope through what they've gone through, to create and to move through their emotions. And so it doesn't require any sort of talking, doesn't require people to even abide by the instructions of the particular art activities. It's very free flowing. And so a little bit, that's just a little bit about A Window Between Worlds. Michelle dropped the link to their website in the chat. They do offer trainings. And they also, have one-on-one calls where you can get help adapting resources and ideas for folks in detention settings. And I know JDI has also used their services and in their training as well in the support groups they've provided to folks. So again, just a little bit about A Window Between Worlds. This is their participant evaluation. And we're going to do the same thing as we did last time. Are there any sort of questions on here that we wouldn't ask everybody? And I see one in particular, a little bit down the line here where it says this workshop will positively impact my relationship with my children. Why wouldn't we include that in a client survey for everybody? In particular,
Not everyone has children.
Yeah, exactly. Not everyone has children. Are there any other reasons why maybe we're doing a parent group? Would we ask this question to caregivers or parents? Yeah,
I think it would be difficult just because, I mean, there's already so many barriers between, and they're not playing the role of the active parent because they're not there, incarcerated. So that might be a little tricky, like that reminder, maybe like, oh, I'm not there. I'm not, an active, person in their day-to-day routine lives and activities, maybe.
Yeah. Thank you, Priscilla. I know Esmeralda also mentioned others may have lost their children, may have lost relationships with their children, maybe you're still mending that relationship. Yeah, Marisela, they might be under a CPS case. Absolutely. Yeah, all great answers to why we would not include this in a client survey for folks that are incarcerated, and just folks in general, if it's not specific to caregiving and we're not aware of the type of relationship that they hold, we want to be conscious of that. So I'm going to pass it over to Yamila to talk about JDI, a survey that they use for their workshops.
Yeah, so this is the client evaluation form that JDI uses for our therapeutic art workshop series at a couple of CDCR prisons. And we distribute a version of this form 3 times throughout the 8-week series. So this is our midway evaluation form. And it looks very similar to our initial evaluation form and our final one. Our final one is just like slightly a bit longer. We try to make this eval as simple as possible. We try to utilize a lot of white space for people who have visual impairments. We also try to use clear and simple language throughout, just so we could capture responses from people with different reading levels. We also distribute this in Spanish. And then, as you can see from the instructional piece at the top, we make sure that we are clear that this can be filled out confidentially. People don't have to put their names anywhere. And we also make time within the curriculum and within the workshop itself for the eval. So this is just integrated into the workshop. And then just one final note on the actual form itself is that we have a sentence at the end asking whether or not we can share quotes from the form with other parties. And this is sort of to Marcela's point earlier, this is really just to express a need for this program to our funders. So we try to incorporate that question already, so we don't have to do the work of like trying to build a case for ourselves. And we just integrate it again into the form. And I did just want to mention that we've struggled to sort of capture constructive feedback from people. Just anecdotally, I feel like at some of the facilities for men where programming is limited, we've noticed that people are just generally grateful to have any kind of programming. And so the feedback we receive is generally positive. And then for that same reason, we really make sure to seriously consider the feedback that asks us to make changes. So for example, now that we've had the opportunity to expand our workshop from 8 to 12 weeks, we really incorporated a lot of the changes that the participants have shared with us throughout the program, just to honor that the feedback was given to us in the first place. We always try to be clear about the limitations of our work. So like, we'll share that we would like to make changes to the art supplies that we provide, but we're restricted by our budget and the facility's approval. Just so that we can be clear about what changes program participants can expect, right? But I think this is going to be a really great empathy exercise for how it feels to be a participant giving an agency feedback, because just like Marcela, I want to know if people have any thoughts about this particular form. You know, if there are any elements of the survey that you feel are applicable, if something is missing from the survey, or if you would change anything. I'm like sweating. I'm like, oh gosh, what are people gonna say? Just kidding. But no, I'm really excited to get y'all's feedback. So anyone, you can type it in the chat or unmute yourself. Or if y'all think it's perfect, let me know too. Good feedback is all feedback is good feedback. Okay, yeah. Eliza says maybe adding a question on topics I would like to go over, for sure. Anyone else? It can be about the formatting too. Some people have actually expressed that it's a little difficult to read, even though it's 14-point font.
The boxed responses are hard for me to read a little bit. Like it's too close to the question, so maybe a little bit of space, or I don't know, maybe playing a little bit around with that.
Yeah, I love that, Esmeralda, especially because we talk about how so many people who are incarcerated have reading disabilities. So I think that's super important for sure. Anyone else? Maybe I'll take one more comment. A brave soul who wants to critique this. Okay, it's perfect. I love it. Oh my gosh, overall it's great. Oh, Veronica, I saw you unmute.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to go.
The very bottom, maybe like highlight, I gave GDI permission to share quotes from this kind of thing, you know, before they say yes, no. Just highlight it so they could read that one part.
Yeah, and actually that's some of the feedback that we've heard from incarcerated people too. Just that it seems like someone can easily skip over that that section. So thank you so much. So now that you've seen all these different versions of feedback forms, and we talked about it a little already, but we wanted to sort of pose a question before we do the Q&A, which is just, what type of feedback are you hoping to gather? We've talked about it a little bit now in the breakout rooms, but yeah, what sort of do you want to see? What kind of information do you want to see your agency collect? Cool, yeah. Eliza says, I really want to see answers that clients felt safe in the groups, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, in doing this exercise, I'm like, I want to see that as well. You know, I want to make sure y'all feel safe in this group. But yes, definitely. I think that's super important, Eliza. And in this space, we can also talk about how we want to attempt to do that. And like Marcela said, we're here to have conversations about what these tools could look like or how to build these tools. But yeah, I think this is an important point, how we want to, what type of feedback we want to start getting. Anyone else? Oh,
I was just going to say, it really speaks to the different types of questions we may ask to folks that are incarcerated. It may be more emphasized on, did you feel safe reaching out for our services or participating in a support group? And that may give us a sense of why other people may not participate or reach out for support. But yeah, any other feedback that folks want to hear about? If not, we're open to taking questions now too. Either one. We're in a liminal space now. We'll take both.
For me, I guess, as I mentioned before, I'm a supervisor for the sexual programs. I just want to make sure if there is something missing that, you know, our clients are letting us know what that is, that we can incorporate into, you know, when my coordinators or advocates head out and assist them and provide the services.
Yeah. So what else can we support you on? You know, we have a set of services we provide to folks in the community, but there may be some other services or referrals that are needed by clients that are incarcerated. So what are those things? Yeah. Any other ideas for feedback or questions for us? Is anyone going to reach out to us for support on evaluation? On that note, I'm going to put our emails in the chat, or collectively we'll put our emails in the chat.
Can I ask y'all which method of feedback has been most effective for you
It
in your
depends.
organization?
I think it depends on what kind of services we're providing. So like if we're doing, I think I'll speak for Valor, like we only provide letter correspondence. We don't do any sort of support group. So I think being able to send a letter with the survey with very non-triggering questions is what we would probably do. Since we don't have a hotline number, they wouldn't be able to hop on a call with us and have more like a process-oriented feedback. But JD, I don't know if you have any thoughts too. You shared one of your evaluation forms.
Yeah, I really like that question, Chris, I think for a couple of reasons. So we operate a hotline for Michigan and Vermont. And I think just because of the time constraints, it's really difficult to be able to do it because the crisis line. So I think it's really difficult to sort of do it in a way that feels empathetic and genuine and authentic, to be able to have that when people are in crisis and they can only talk for about 15 minutes and they're not recurring clients. So it would be difficult to like sort of schedule something with them. And we receive a lot of calls and we receive a lot of mail. And so it's easier for us in terms of our capacity, our staff capacity, to have to send out written material. So we usually do like written surveys. But I think, again, it's like to Marcela's point, I think it really, what is important is like being intentional, like what sort of information are you trying to gather and from who, and then sort of working around that, as opposed to sort of having like, I think I just say this because I think so often I'll be like, oh, it make a lot of sense to send out like a written like survey. And then I build sort of a survey around wanting to have like a written material. And then it sort of feels like when we try to launch that, or we talk through that as a team, or we troubleshoot, I'm like, oh, this doesn't gather any of the information I want to gather. And this isn't best suited for the participants of the program. So I think it really just does depend on what sort of information you're hoping to get.
And I think to your point, Yamila, sometimes we don't meet with people on an ongoing basis. It may be that someone may speak to us one time. And so it just, I think, a matter of like incorporating questions at the end of your call. Like, is there anything I can, anything else I can support you with? And so, you know, really building evaluation just into our consciousness when we're communicating with folks, getting feedback, you know, when we think we have time, when it's intentional, when it seems like the right time. And if we have more ongoing services, then that will be helpful in terms of having a written survey, or, you know, scheduling a call with someone on the hotline. But I think for folks that are kind of one-off folks that may not come back for our services, being intentional and, you know, with every single person we communicate with, what else can I support you with? Or, you know, how have you been feeling today? And those are still evaluation questions, but they're more live and they're not a written survey. Any other questions? And I just wanted to also plug the additional resources that Michelle dropped in the chat. Valor US, Just Detention International, those are more advocacy specific resources. And the PREA Resource Center is more correction specific. That's where we go to get clarity on corrections practices and protocol. And we also encourage folks that are advocates at your agencies to also check out that website.
We'll also throw a couple more links in the chat. This is a web page that contains like the bulk of our trainings that have been developed by JDI and Valor over the past couple of years that speak specifically to honing advocates' experience around work and detention.
And then last but not least, Valor has one more resource, and this one is more private facing. So you do have to register for this hub. Some more resources that like might get more into the weeds of advocacy or that are more, like I said, private facing. So that does require an approval. And so if you have an agency specific email, very easily we'll go ahead and approve it. If you have like a Gmail account, we'll have to check in to see, are you one of our member agencies or are you an advocate? So that is another resource. And that also concludes the end of our webinar. We will also just say that Valor has our statewide conference next month coming up very quickly. So I hope to see some of you there, if not all of you. And take care, everybody. Hope you have a good weekend. Bye.